Good morning. Welcome back. We are almost finished with Farmer Boy. We're actually going to finish the book this week. We've got a chapter today and a chapter tomorrow, and then we'll just spend some time reviewing before a test on Friday. So almost finished, and then we'll move on to our last book of the year, which is Jungle Book, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy that next. So it's always a little sad to finish a book, but exciting to start a new one. So today's chapter is called Mr. Thompson's Pocketbook. And I kind of think of this as the last chapter, but part one of the last chapter, because this really goes along well with the next chapter. So it's kind of a two-part ending. So this is the first part of really how the story wraps up. So let's begin. I've got my book here, page 344. If you have your own book, you can follow along. You probably also are on page 344. Now, do you know what a pocketbook is or have a guess as to what it might be? Kind of sounds like a pocket-sized book, but it's actually like a little wallet or a billfold. That's what we're going to be talking about in this chapter. Now, Father had so much hay that year, the stock could not eat it all, so he decided to sell some of it in town. He went to the woods and brought back a straight, smooth ash log. He hewed the bark from it, like cutting it away, smoothing it out, and then with a wooden maul, he beat the log, turning it and pounding it until he softened the layer of wood that had grown last summer and loosened the thin layer of wood underneath it, which had grown the summer before. Then with his knife, he cut long gashes from end to end, about 1.5 inches apart, and he peeled off that thin, tough layer of wood in strips about 1.5 inches wide. Those were ash withes. Let me actually double check on the pronunciation of that. It might be withes, like scythes.
Withy.
So that's I don't know if you could hear that, but withes is correct. And as an adjective, it's withy, which I guess is more often used. So withe is like a really thin, flexible branch or piece of wood. Withe. So when Almanzo saw them piled on the big barn floor, he guessed that Father was going to bale hay, and he asked, and so these are withes, apparently, to bale the hay. That's a hay bale. He asked, "Be you going to need help?" Father's eyes twinkled. "Yes, son." Why do you think Father's eyes are twinkling? That's right, he loves it when his son wants to do things with him. He gets excited when Almanzo likes farm work. "You can stay home from school," he said. "You won't learn hay baling any younger." Early next morning, Mr. Weed, the hay baler, came with his press, and Almanzo helped to set it up on the big barn floor. It was a stout wooden box, as long and wide as a bale of hay, but 10 feet high. Its cover could be fastened on tightly, and its bottom was loose. 2 iron levers were hinged to the loose bottom, and the levers ran on little wheels on iron tracks going out from each end of the box. I've got a picture of what this hay baler looks like. Here's the hay press. There it is. A hay press was an early form of the hay baler and was used to bundle hay in order to make it easier to transport. So they came into use around the middle of the 1800s, but were not used regularly until the 1870s. And the fact that the Wilders used one actually speaks of their wealth and the progressive farming practices that they have. So it was a stationary machine, which means it was still and powered by a horse. The box chamber was filled with hay, and as the horse walked in a circular motion, it set in action gears and a chain drive that compressed the hay tightly. It was then manually tied together with twine, wire, or as in the book, ash withes, which were strips of pliable tree bark. So interesting. So Then he fastened the cover on the box, and Father called out, "All right, Almanzo?" Did I skip over something? Actually, I think we were supposed to be right here. Now, the tracks were like small railroad tracks, and the press was called a railroad press. It was a new fine machine for baling hay. In the barnyard, Father and Mr. Webb set up a capstan with a long sweep on it. A rope from the capstan went through a ring under the hay press and was tied to another rope that went to the wheels at the ends of the levers. When everything was ready, Almanzo hitched Bess to the sweep. Father pitched hay into the box, and Mr. Weed stood in the box and trampled it down till the box could hold no more. Till it was the last straw, right? Literally. Then he fastened the cover on the box, and Father called, "All right, Almanzo." Almanzo slapped Bess with the lines and shouted, "Get up, Bess." Now Bess began to walk around the capstan, and the capstan began to wind up the rope. The rope pulled the ends of the levers toward the press, and the inner ends of the levers pushed its loose bottom upward. The bottom slowly rose, squeezing the hay. The rope creaked, and the box groaned, till the hay was pressed so tight it couldn't be pressed tighter. Then Father shouted, "Whoa!" and Almanzo shouted, "Whoa, Bess!" I always say it in that kind of voice. It seems like that's what is usually done. Now Father climbed up the hay press and ran ash withes through narrow cracks in the box. He pulled them tight around the bale of hay and knotted them firmly. Mr. Weed unfastened the cover, and up popped the bale of hay, bulging between tight ash withes. It weighed 250 pounds, but Father lifted it easily. Whoa, he is strong. Then Father and Mr. Weed reset the press, and Almanzo unwound the rope from the capstan, and they began again to make another bale of hay. All day they worked, and that night Father said they had baled enough. Do you have any guesses as to why they use this machine, but they wouldn't use the threshing machine? Do you remember why they didn't use the threshing machine? It's because it wasted some of the grains. But this is not wasting hay, it's only helping them. So they're good with technology and doing things that make things easier as long as things don't get wasted. Now, Almanzo sat at the supper table, wishing he did not have to go back to school. He thought about figuring, meaning math, and he was thinking so hard that words came out of his mouth before he knew it. 30 bales to a load at $2 a bale, he said. Well, that's $60 a load. He stopped scared. He knew better than to speak at the table when he wasn't spoken to. So he wants to be a farmer so badly, he's just thinking in his head, oh, it's going to be this much. 30 bales to a load, $2 a bale, $60. Mercy on us, listen to the boy, Mother said. Well, well, son, said Father. I see you've been studying to some purpose. He drank the tea out of his saucer, set it down, and looked again at Almanzo. Learning is best put into practice. What say you ride to town with me tomorrow and sell that load of hay? Oh, well, that's very true. That learning is best when it's put into practice. You can't just listen. You've got to do the work. And for Almanzo, he needs to do the work of selling it to really understand and learn best. Just like when he made the sled with Father. Oh, yes, please, Father, Almanzo almost shouted. He did not have to go to school the next morning. He climbed high up on top of the load of hay and lay there on his stomach and kicked up his heels. Father's hat was down below him, and beyond were the plump backs of the horses. He was as high up as if he were in a tree. Sorry, it's a little too low. Now the load swayed a little, and the wagon creaked, and the horses' feet made dull sounds on the hard snow. The air was clear and cold. The sky was very blue, and all the snowy fields were sparkling. Just beyond the bridge over Trout River, Almanzo saw a small black thing lying beside the road. When the wagon passed, he leaned over the edge of the hay and saw that it was a pocketbook. Remember what I said a pocketbook was early on? Try a wallet or billfold with money. Or we'll see if it has money. He yelled, and Father stopped the horses to let him climb down and pick it up. It was a fat black wallet. Almanzo shinnied up the bales of hay, and the horses went on. He looked at the pocketbook. He opened it, and it was full of banknotes. That means some money. There was nothing to show who owned them. He handed it down to Father, and Father gave him the reins. The team seemed far below, the team of horses, that is, with the line slanting down to the hames, and Almanzo felt very small. But he liked to drive. He held the lines carefully, and the horses went steadily along. Father was looking at the pocketbook and the money. There's $1,500 here, Father said. That's $1,500, which would be a lot more today. Wow. What on earth would you do if you found that? The poor person who lost it. He says, now who does it belong to? He's a man who's afraid of banks. He's acting like Sherlock Holmes here. He can figure out it's a type of person who'd be afraid of a bank to carry around $1,500 in a wallet. Or he wouldn't carry so much money around. You can see by the creases in the bills, he's carried them for some time. They're big bowls and folded together, so likely he got them all at once. Now, who's suspicious and stingy, meaning they don't like to give up their money, and they sold something valuable lately? That would make sense if you've got $1,500 from selling something recently. Or just that's why you had the billfold or wallet at all. Now, Almanzo didn't know, but Father didn't expect him to answer. Father's just thinking out loud. The horses went around a curve in the road as well as if Father had been driving them. Thompson, Father exclaimed. He sold some land last fall. He's afraid of banks, and he's suspicious, and he's so stingy, he'd skin a flea for its hide and tallow. Thompson's the man. He put the pocketbook in his pocket and took the lines from Almanzo. We'll see if we can find him in town, he said. Now, Father drove first to the livery sale and feed stable. The livery man came out, and soon enough, Father let Almanzo sell the hay. He stood back and did not say anything, while Almanzo showed the livery man that the hay was good timothy and clover, clean and bright, and every bale solid and full weight. How much do you want for it? The livery man asked. $2.25 a bale, Almanzo said. I won't pay that price, said the livery man. It isn't worth it. What would you call a fair price? Almanzo asked him. Not a penny over $2, the livery man said. All right, I'll take $2, said Almanzo quickly. The livery man looked at Father, and then he pushed back his hat and asked Almanzo why he priced the hay at $2.25 in the first place. Are you taking it at $2? Almanzo asked. The livery man said he was. Well, Almanzo said, I asked $2.25 because if I'd asked for $2, you wouldn't have paid but $1.75. Oh, that is very smart. He's learned something from Mother. If you're in a situation where you have to kind of bargain, go back and forth, ask for a little more than you really are thinking you deserve, and then the other person will go down. The livery man laughed and said to Father, That's a smart boy of yours. Well, time will show, Father said. Many a good beginning makes a bad ending. Meaning, sometimes people are raised well to begin with, but then they turn paths and head down a wrong path. But it remains to be seen how he turns out in the long run. Now, Father did not take the money for the hay. He let Almanzo take it and count it to make sure it was $60. Then they went to Mr. Case's store. This store was always crowded, but Father always did his trading there because Mr. Case sold his goods cheaper than other merchants. Mr. Case said, I'd rather have a nimble sixpence than a slow shilling, which means a shilling is more than a sixpence, but he would rather have money quickly than to have a lot of money but come slowly. Now, Almanzo stood in the crowd with Father, waiting while Mr. Case served first comers. Mr. Case was polite and friendly to everybody alike. He had to be because they were all customers. Father was polite to everybody too, but he was not as friendly to some as he was to others. Now, after a while, Father gave Almanzo the pocketbook and told him to look for Mr. Thompson. Father must stay in the store to wait his turn. He could not lose time if they were to get home by chore time. No other boys were on the street. They were all in school. Almanzo liked to be walking down the street carrying all that money, and he thought how glad Mr. Thompson would be to see it again. He looked in the stores and the barber shop and the bank. Then he saw Mr. Thompson's team standing on a side street in front of Mr. Paddock's wagon shop. Okay, he's got to be so happy if indeed it is his pocketbook. He opened the door of the long, low building and went in. Mr. Paddock and Mr. Thompson were standing by the round-bellied stove, looking at a piece of hickory and talking about it. Almanzo waited because he could not interrupt them. He learned well that you cannot interrupt adults when they're talking. It was warm in the building, and there was a good smell of shavings and leather and paint. Beyond the stove, 2 workmen were making a wagon, and another was painting thin red lines on the red spokes of a new buggy. The buggy glistened proudly in black paint. Long curls of shavings lay in heaps, and the whole place was as pleasant as a barn on a rainy day. The workmen whistled while they measured and marked and sawed and planed the clean-smelling wood. Kind of sounds fun to make wagons. Now, Mr. Thompson was arguing about the price of a new wagon. Almanzo decided that Mr. Paddock did not like Mr. Thompson, but he was trying to sell the wagon. He figured the cost with his big carpenter's pencil and soothingly tried to persuade Mr. Thompson. You see, I can't cut the price any further and still pay my men, he said. I'm doing the best I can for you. I guarantee we'll make a wagon to please you, or you don't have to take it. So he's saying, I have to pay all of the people who are making this. You can't sell something for less than the cost it takes to actually make it. Well, maybe I'll come back to you if I can't do better elsewhere, Mr. Thompson said suspiciously. So he's stingy, which means he doesn't like to give up any of his money. And he's suspicious, too. Well, glad to serve you any time, said Mr. Paddock. So he is still being nice. Then he saw Almanzo and asked him how the pig was getting along. Almanzo liked big, jolly Mr. Paddock. He always asked about Lucy. She'll weigh around 150, Almanzo told him. Then he turned to Mr. Thompson and asked, Did you lose a pocketbook? Mr. Thompson jumped. He clapped a hand to his pocket and fairly shouted, Yes, I have! $1,500 in it, too. What about it? What do you know about it? It's not a very nice way to speak to him. Is this it? Almanzo asked. Yes, that's it, Mr. Thompson said, snatching the pocketbook. He opened it and hurriedly counted the money. He counted all the bills over twice, and he looked exactly like a man skinning a flea for its hide and tallow. Now, then he breathed a long sigh of relief and said, Well, the stern boy didn't steal any of it. Can you believe that? Now, he came to the conclusion that he didn't steal any of it, but he sort of acted like he thought Almanzo would have stolen some money. Now, why would Almanzo come up to him and give him back a pocketbook if he was going to steal some money? Almanzo's face was hot as fire. He wanted to hit Mr. Thompson. I don't blame him, because he's thinking, I'm doing a nice thing for you. I found your pocketbook. We figured out it was yours. We're giving it back to you. This is something you should be grateful for, not act like I'm this thief. Mr. Thompson thrust his skinny hand into his pants pocket and hunted around. He took out something. Here, he said, putting it into Almanzo's hand. It was a nickel. That's all he gave him. Almanzo was so angry he couldn't see. He hated Mr. Thompson. He wanted to hurt him. I think that's kind of extreme. Mr. Thompson called him a darn boy, kind of like darn, and that really hurt his feelings. It was kind of offensive. And he as good as called him a thief. Almanzo didn't want his old nickel. Suddenly he thought what to say. Here, he said, handing the nickel back. Keep your nickel. I can't change it. Mr. Thompson's tight, mean face turned red. One of the workmen laughed a short, jeering laugh. But Mr. Paddock stepped up to Mr. Thompson, angry. Don't you call this boy a thief, Thompson, he said. And he's not a beggar either. That's how you treat him, is it? When he brings you back your $1,500, call him a thief and hand him a nickel, will you? And by the way, Almanzo's response is basically saying, oh, I bet you're even trying to give me a penny, and I don't have change to give you. Here's Mr. Paddock talking to Mr. Thompson with his pocketbook, really protecting little Almanzo there. Now, Mr. Thompson stepped back, but Mr. Paddock stepped right after him. Mr. Paddock shook his fist under Mr. Thompson's nose. You measly skinflint, Mr. Paddock said. Not if I know it, you won't. Not in my place. A good, honest, decent little chap, and you, for a cent, No, you hand him 100 of that money and do it quick. No, 200, he says. Whoa, $200, I say, or take the consequences. Now, he is a big man that's probably scaring Mr. Thompson right now. Now, Mr. Thompson tried to say something, and so did Almanzo. But Mr. Paddock's fists clenched and the muscles of his arms bulged. 200, he shouted. Hand it over quick, or I'll see you do. Mr. Thompson shrank down small, watching Mr. Paddock, and he licked his thumb and hurriedly counted off some bills. He held them out to Almanzo. Almanzo said, Mr. Paddock, now get out of here if you know what's healthy. Get out, Mr. Paddock said to Mr. Thompson. And before Almanzo could blink, he was standing there with the bills in his hand, and Mr. Thompson slammed the door behind himself. Almanzo was so excited, he stammered. He said he didn't think Father would like it. Almanzo felt queer about taking all that money, and yet he did want to keep it. Mr. Paddock said he would talk to Father. He rolled down his shirt sleeves and put on his coat and asked, Now where is he? Almanzo almost ran to keep up with Mr. Paddock's long strides. The bills were clutched tight in his hand. Father was putting packages into the wagon, and Mr. Paddock told him what had happened. For a cent I'd have smashed his sneering face, Mr. Paddock said. But it struck me that giving up cash is actually what hurts him most. And I figure the boy's entitled to it. Do you think Almanzo deserves that money? Now, there usually is a reward, basically to honor the integrity of someone. If they find money and then give it back to a person, that shows great integrity, and it should be something that's rewarded, even though you should do it no matter what. So it could go either way, but mainly it was a bad attitude from Mr. Thompson. I don't know as anyone's entitled to anything for common honesty, Father objected. Yeah, I agree with Father. I don't think he has to have something just for being honest. Though I must say, I appreciate the spirit you showed, Paddock. I don't say he deserved more than decent gratitude for giving Thompson his own money, Mr. Paddock said. But it's too much to ask him to stand and take insults on top of that. I say Almanzo's entitled to that 200. So, well, there's something in what you say, said Father. Finally, he decided, all right, son, you can keep that money. Almanzo smoothed out the bills and looked at them. $200. That was as much as the horse buyer paid for one of Father's 4-year-olds. Oh, goodness. Do you see what's going to happen? Now, and I'm much obliged to you, Paddock, standing up for the boy the way you did, Father said. Well, I can afford to lose a customer now and then, and a good cause, said Mr. Paddock. He asked Almanzo, what are you going to do with all that money? Almanzo looked at Father. Could I put it in the bank? He asked. That's the place to put money, said Father. Well, 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 $200. I was twice your age before I had so much. So was I. Yes, and older than that, Mr. Paddock said. Now, Father and Almanzo went to the bank. Almanzo could just look over the ledge at the cashier sitting on his high stool with a pin behind his ear. The cashier craned to look down at Almanzo and asked Father, "Hadn't I better put this down to your account, sir?" "No," said Father. "It's the boy's money. Let him handle it himself. He won't learn any younger." That's the same thing he said about the hay baling. He is old enough, basically, to learn this lesson. "Yes, sir," the cashier said. Almanzo had to write his name twice. Then the cashier carefully counted the bills and wrote Almanzo's name in a little book. He wrote the figures, $200, in the book, and he gave the book to Almanzo. Almanzo went out of the bank with Father and asked him, "How do I get the money out again?" "You ask for it, and they'll give it to you. But remember this, son. As long as that money's in the bank, it's working for you. Every dollar in the bank is making you 4 cents a year. Wow. That's a sight easier than you can earn money any other way. Anytime you want to spend a nickel, you stop and think how much work it takes to earn a dollar." We've seen that lesson before with the Independence Day chapter, right? He knows with the value of a dollar. "Yes, Father," Almanzo said. He was thinking that he had more than enough money to buy a little colt. He could break a little colt of his own. He could teach it everything. Father would never let him break one of his colts. But this was not the end of that exciting day. Bum, bum, bum! The end of the book is coming. Farmer Boy is the name of the chapter, the last chapter of the book. So that was one exciting start to the day, but the day's not over. What do you think might happen at the end of this book? Now we know what Almanzo wants to buy with his $200. That's right, he wants a horse, of course. He loves horses. Since the beginning of the story, he's been obsessed with them. So it's not surprising that that's what he wants to spend his money on. But what exciting thing do you think is to come? You'll see in tomorrow's chapter. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will talk to you all later. There's a few questions to answer along with this video, and we'll see you soon. Bye.